Picture this. You're sitting backstage. It's your company kickoff. You're getting mic'd up. You just took your last sip of water. What are you doing back there? Well, your CEO is about to introduce you to kick off the keynote. Why, you ask? It's because you've done something that has unlocked value for the entire company. You built a strong, vibrant, healthy community that benefited your sales counterparts, your marketing, your product, your docs, your support, and you're going on stage to talk about it. How many of you would like to see something like this happen in your careers? I know I would. I would love to give a keynote one day. Be nervous, probably mess up. I may trip, but I'd be excited about it. So let's see, how do we make that happen? I'm here to talk to you about using community ROI to become the star you already are. So proving the value of community to your organization so stakeholders, executives all want to invest and partner with you. I'm Josh Grose, head of growth at Common Room, and I work with community leaders like yourself every day to build impactful programs that impact not only the company, but also your community members. So creating stronger relationships, more business value, and more intrinsic benefits to everybody that participates. So let's jump in. You're all sitting here, you attended Clicks because your company is invested in community. They have a community leadership role and you have it. And what that means is you've got to build that community for the company. So this could be a community of practice, community of product, but ultimately you're there to define that strategy and implement it. Now, your executives, because they're making this investment, just like with every other investment they make, they expect some type of return on investment. So what is the impact, or how do we quantify the value that community is delivered? You can only say invest in something like community for as long as it starts to become a line item that becomes something that actually people ask about. And so if you can't prove out that value, it becomes really, really difficult. And what your executives don't understand is it's not just about having a community anymore. I was just reading a study from Gartner from 2021, how 2/3 of businesses, so mid-market and above digital businesses, have communities. That means that you're not only competing on a product standpoint, marketing standpoint, and so forth, now you're actually competing for those same eyes to engage in your community to participate. And that makes it really challenging for you in terms of expectations. And to be honest, in the last decade, it's gotten a lot harder to lead a community than it had ever been before. And the reason being is that all those channels that you used to have, which were really just the forums and maybe your in real life conference event, has now expanded across all these different digital surface areas, some of which you control and some you don't. For instance, say Twitter, if I'm sure you're looking at the handle and maybe even participating in Twitter, well, you could probably see some product appreciation that's happening there as well as complaints. Then say in GitHub, if you have a technical community, like many of our customers today at Common Room, then you definitely have some repos running in GitHub where users of your products or your open source offerings are doing pull requests, comments, filing issues. Now, if you have a forum, say Discourse, Insided, Khoros, etc., then people are also submitting bugs in there and replying to other users with questions. Now, if you also have something, say like Discord or Slack, you're getting like async, regular feedback on your product, feature requests. Now, beyond that, you still have those live meetups, those user groups. You're trying to decentralize, say, the community to a degree, elevate folks. And then where it's getting really interesting is as you're engaging in this community, understanding what is the relationship that these users have to the business already. So understanding the friction that they're hitting, is it related to how they use the product? Is it related to like what they expect from a commercial standpoint? Now, if that wasn't enough, you still have to react to everything going on a daily basis. When we talk to community leaders, like the job is not getting any easier. Here's just 10 examples of things that community leaders, community engagement professionals, operations have to do on a daily basis. A lot of it is reacting to what is going on across all of these channels. So you're going through the digital apps to look for conversations, make sure things don't slip through the cracks. You're trying to still personalize and hyper-personalize that experience for your users. So you're identifying and welcoming them. You're really trying to make sure that users are getting the benefits of community that you expect. So the what's in it for me. And so you're doing research interviews, making sure you have that one-to-one connection. Then, of course, you've always got opportunities to identify user-generated content, something very, very valuable to marketing. Then the feedback that's coming in, what are you doing with that? Well, it's expected that you're probably filing that with product support, segmenting and nurturing champions. So again, like once your community gets to a certain level and there's a lot of interactions there, you want to build programs, writing educational content, building presentations, recruiting folks for different programs. Now, of course, what happens every day, somebody asks you, hey, do you know users in the community that could do this? Or are you familiar with like this conversation that's happening over here? You've got stakeholders to deal with. And finally, something that takes hours, and we always underestimate how long it's going to take, is reporting across this wide distributed community. And if you overlay that with like what's going on in the strategic level of like building a community, there are different phases that each community goes through. And so many of the organizations that we work with, they've already started to seed their community and build a community. At the seeding phase, it's all around like measuring engagement, measuring activity growth, ultimately seeing the community grow. These metrics may become somewhat vanity metrics later on, but early on, it's relatively easy. You've got a couple different sources. You're measuring week over week, month over month, maybe active users. Now, once you start to see members within your community raise their hands and express interest and start to network, so you're actually seeing a community form versus maybe an audience, that's when programs start to emerge, where you start to take some of those industry best practices around MVP and champion programs. Maybe if it's a very technical audience, you might start to see moderator programs. Here, the measurement gets a lot harder because you're starting to see more cohorts emerge. You want to be able to separate out different types of members and see what their impact is on the community, as well as potentially the impact on the business to a degree. You also have to be very, very thoughtful in terms of programs, because now you're actually delivering something full life cycle, not just building day after day. It's really like a cohesive strategy to deliver. And the more programs that you have around user advocacy, champion programs, advisory boards, the more work it is. Now, where we see a lot of communities get hung up, and this we just saw in the recent CMX study, where only 10% of communities were doing this, was in activating the business. Meaning, are we able to prove an ROI or attribution or cause and effect between what community is doing and the outcomes or those key performance indicators for the business? This is very, very difficult, and we'll discuss why. But you'd think like you're delivering all this value just from the programs, from the interactions, the brand recognition, the closeness that you're having with users, the advocacy. Isn't that enough? And you'd think it would be, because when you look at each of these stakeholders, so if we take marketing, for instance, what does marketing care about? Marketing cares about leads. They care about the brand. They care about the perception. They care that their message is resonating with the people that it should resonate with. And what happens in community that could inform all of that? Well, you're going to learn about how your customers talk about the product. You're going to learn about who your customers are of the product, users versus decision makers, depending on who turns up in the community. You're going to see people talk about use cases and ask questions about use cases for your products. And those use cases can turn into user-generated content. You're going to grow relationships with folks that are strategically valuable to the company. Say they're working at some of your top customers, and you're going to be inviting them just on their behaviors, their organic behaviors in the community. You're going to identify content that can help. You're going to be able to help inform like event strategies, user groups, conferences. So there's so much there that you're already doing that directly kind of rolls up to what marketing has to do around lead attribution. If you take a look at something like product, literally everything you're doing is informing product, because the biggest challenges that product has is like, are we building the right product for the right user at the right time? And the conversations that you're having within your community, that's the closeness that your product team needs to be able to say with any degree of confidence that what they're doing are the right things. And so all those conversations that you're having and the relationships that you're fostering, It's allowing the product team to maintain a level of closeness with your users in spite of, say, the company growing, meaning many product managers, many product lines, which naturally causes product teams to get further and further from the customers that they are catering to. From a support standpoint, what does support care about? They want to make sure that, like, one, they're identifying friction in the product that either should be documented or should be accelerated in terms of product development. They want to know, like, who are we impacting, and can we get in front of those, and where are the escalations happening? And a lot of this, like when you think about what you do on a daily basis, and you see it across social media pretty heavily today, is like when you're frustrated, you're going to escalate to where you can get an answer. And we see within support, especially, that a lot of the support escalations happen across multiple channels. And so you being able to synthesize all this information, understand who it is, and report back, that's hugely valuable, because you're essentially the tip of the spear for what's happening in support. Whereas they may have lagging indicators, you actually have the leading conversations that are happening. And then finally, sales. Like, I know we talk about sales, nobody wants to talk about sales, even marketing within community. But when you think about what is the core role that sales has, well, yes, it's closing business, it's getting contracts. But how do they do that? They have to start with conversations with users that should be buying. How do they have conversations? They have conversations, or they have folks that are receptive to having conversations with sales if they're able to provide value. How do you provide value? You resonate with the right context at the right time. So those conversations that are happening out in public around use cases with potential customers, that's what can inform sales on how do I actually provide value. That is really, really important. One of the biggest challenges a sales rep has is, like, am I talking to the right person? Am I sharing with them the right content that is valuable to them at the right time? When a user enters your community, they're asking a question, they're filing an issue in GitHub, they're introducing themselves and what they're working on. That informs sales on how do I actually add value. And then, of course, what you're doing within community is you're creating, like, a lot of shared minds around some common, I don't want to say obsession, interest or product usage. And ultimately what that does is it establishes not only credibility for the company, which is something that sales may have had to do previously, but it's also creating social proof, which again helps with sales because it overcomes objections. And, like, if you wanted to look at, say, all those things that we're doing from a community standpoint, really what a lot of thought leaders in this space do that's extraordinarily impactful, and it's helped elevate, say, this community industry, is they say, okay, how do we tie all those activities into, say, programs or ways that we can communicate the value more effectively than just with anecdotes? And you look at, like, what Rosie Sherry's done with Rosie Land and within her career around tying experimentation into programs, into outcomes. Mary Thengval has done an amazing job in understanding the value of developer relations. So that technical audience. David Spinks, we're all familiar with, around the spaces model, as well as Carrie Melissa Jones has done some phenomenal work around KPIs and the role that community plays with leading indicators. So what's happening in community impacts the lagging indicators, or what the business measures over time. If you're thinking about, say, like the value of champion programs, like Bill Johnson at 3C does a phenomenal job of talking about champion programs and has developed some great content. Marjorie has done a great job in terms of voice of the customer and turning that into a program using different data sources. Richard at Feverbee has done a phenomenal job, and I keep saying phenomenal because really these are experts in terms of understanding how to optimize your forums for, like, greater engagement, better support deflection, and so forth. Community Roundtable has always had great sessions on this. And then, of course, Brian and Erica in Before the Lock on some of the tactical and template use cases for, like, delivering business value and conversations with stakeholders. But if you take all of that and just put it into a couple different buckets, like, it's very easy to see that what you're doing can be turned into a program. For instance, like, you're getting spontaneous product feedback. rather than just throw it into a Google Sheet and say, oh, here, let's Slack this over, or let's file a JIRA for it, or however you're delivering that today. What if you were able to deliver a voice of the customer program or advisory boards like early access programs? The one-on-one enablement that a lot of folks are doing, especially from a DevRel and developer advocacy programs, those are helpful and they're very personal. But what if we could turn these into like workshops or published guides or demo environments? Public appreciation, user-generated content is all the rage. How do we turn, when somebody is excited about something they just did with your product, into a long-form piece? Support questions, how do we turn those into docs or how-tos so that we can intercept tickets, which is support interception, is something Nicole Saunders says, which I love, because it's not about deflecting, it's about making sure that you're delivering a better support experience before it actually hits support. So it's more proactive. And these are all great programs. The challenge is, if you talk to an executive around programs, they're like, great, you're doing your job. Like, you're thinking strategically, you're actually carrying through, you're not just speaking about what you're doing it, and it's great. But what I need is a machine. And a machine is measured by like, how much leverage can I get out of this to move the business forward? Because as an executive, I can only make investments in a few core areas because we need everybody focused on the same things. And so where should those investments be that are going to give us the most leverage? And the only way to know with any degree of certainty is to be able to say there's going to be cause and effect, and to measure the impact, and to know that it can scale. And that's what executives care about, is scale, impact, and being able to build a machine that everybody can rally around and incorporate in. And the reason we've been so unsuccessful in building these machines in community is we haven't had the ability to quantify the value that we're delivering, and especially quantify it at scale. And without quantifying it, outside of like support deflection use cases and so forth that we've seen historically, maybe a little SEO here, like we really have we're not able to prove impact at the level that the executives care about, and what they're going to want you on stage for is to be able to give that, say, internal company kickoff keynote. Now, at Common Room, by working with some leading communities, we've been able to identify ways that we can get around this, not even get around this, actually address it head on. And so it starts with one key concept. Concept is, within your community, you have members, and these members are users, and sometimes they're the same users across different channels, but regardless, these are individuals. And like, your whole purpose is creating one-to-one relationships with these individuals. Sometimes it's between you and the individuals. More often than not, a really healthy community, it's between the individuals themselves, regardless, as you're the one that are governing that experience. Now, on the other side, which is what your business cares about, are accounts. It's your customers, it's your pipeline, it's who's buying your products. Typically, these have lived in two separate places. And so the relationship between community members and who your customers are is anecdotal at best. And so one of the big challenges are, how do we combine the two? And so we look at, how could we do that? Well, the first thing that we need to do is identifying accounts. So it's discovering the organizations that are already in your community or entering your community, and making sure that we understand that when Josh is in Slack interacting with you and Josh is in Discourse interacting with you, Josh are the same people, and Josh works at Common Room. And once you have that, then the easy part is just getting an access list to your customers. So your customers probably live in something like a Salesforce or a HubSpot. That list, and it may even be in a data warehouse, but that list of customers and when they joined, that is enough. Just knowing that you have the two, now we can start to see something. And honestly, this is where the magic happens. Because once you see that overlap between your customers and your companies, now you understand what the value of community is, because you understand the dollars that are within community today, meaning the customers that spend this much and also are in community. That's not only the dollars that are at risk, because if you don't deliver a great community experience for these users, but it's also the opportunity. Because say you only have 5% of your customers are in your community today, is this a call to action that could help these customers adopt more, have a longer customer lifetime value, and so forth. At the same time, like if you're seeing that, say 80% of our customers are already in our community, what is the value that they're getting out of that? And what is community doing that is shaping that? And should we be investing more to make sure that those dollars continue to grow? Or should we be getting more users that aren't yet customers into the community as well? So you can see how this can inform so many strategies. Now, the second part of this is the customer journey. So when you think about customer journey, and this is something we're talking about, the community journey and so forth, like there is no journey without a destination. Like you'll end up on a journey because you find a destination whether you want to be there or not. But if you really want to map out a customer journey, you need to have a destination in mind. Because once you see that this member of your community did this thing, now you can work your way backwards and identify the journey. And so where we see a lot of communities start are around certification programs, because education is intertwined so deeply with community because education happens organically there. Now, once you start to do certification programs and structured learning, now let's see how does a user progress from entering the community to enrolling in our certification programs to completing them, and what does that mean later on? Product sign up is one that's been very, very popular, especially with these product-led growth companies or open source, is how do we get from community member to activated on our product offering? Purchase, no brainer. Renewals, same thing. These are revenue generating events. Churn is also one. I'm always concerned when I see our top customers, nobody's active in the community. What does that mean? Like, have we not made it apparent for them that there's value there? Like, how do we see those like leading events that could impact their ability to renew? And so when we take what we've just done, so combining the members within your community to the accounts, now we're starting to see some really amazing outcomes for the customers that we've been working with. So for one of our customers, we noticed that community contributes to new business, which, but now we have numbers behind it. Last year, 300 new organizations or new accounts joined the community before they were ever seen within Salesforce. That means that their first interaction that was acknowledged by the company happened in community, not through a marketing pipeline or a lead form or anything like that. That is really, really important. And then what they found from that is in the last year, $5.3 million converted, meaning bought. That was community first. And their pipeline that still exists is $50 million. If you're a $500 million company, that is a high leverage opportunity in making sure that community is invested in the right ways and understanding that line between community activity and revenue. Another great use case here is once you understand who these members are and where they are with across the world or what segments they're in, then you can start to understand where is community having the biggest impact on customer purchases. And what we found in this use case for this customer was that we were seeing high adoption of community first organizations, primarily in European countries. What's most interesting about this is because this company didn't have any community investments in Europe at the time. And so what they immediately wanted to do was say, okay, like we need to do some headcount planning around community and my dog. And ultimately, they created a role within Europe. They also started to build out user groups and do some one-on-one understandings with the community members within each of these countries to understand what is the value they're getting from it and how are they discovering it. Now this one, and this goes straight to the executive conversation, this one's really, really important. So once you know where your users within your community are based, one thing that every executive has to do is budgeting and headcount planning. Like, how are we going to grow? How are we going to scale? And this conversation happened with a chief revenue officer, which is essentially the person that's in charge of go-to-market for an organization. Well, what's interesting about this company is they're based on the West Coast in the United States. And their go-to-market investments, so headcount around sales and marketing, had always been on the West Coast, or at least in North America. What they started to see was they had 10 sales reps in North America, 2 in Europe. Now they had done all their headcount planning, their business plan for the year, And then 3 weeks prior to me meeting with them, they noticed that in Europe, those reps were getting 3x the number of leads as the folks in North America. And nobody could figure it out because there was no additional investment, no additional events or anything going on in Europe compared to North America. Well, when we pulled up what their community looked like, it became pretty darn apparent why there would be more activity in Europe. It's because over roughly, I would say that, well, roughly 40% of their membership in the community was in Europe, and that was actually more than what was in North America. So you can see how this can tie into some strategic goals around headcount planning, but also risk aversion or risk avoidance. Now, lastly, and this is the one where every executive would stop and say, hold on a second, can you back up and go through this again with me? Ultimately, what we found for this company was that when we started doing the analysis on that community first versus did it enter our traditional sales or marketing funnels in Salesforce, we found that for those companies that entered community first, 72% of them that converted happened within the first 90 days. Whereas for those that went through traditional channels, so again, that gated content, those cold calls and so forth, only 42% of those converted within the first 90 days. So we're talking about an 80% improvement in terms of sales acceleration. That means that each rep could theoretically close more business by 80% in a year. That is a high leverage activity and really, really important in terms of productivity. So we've gone through a lot, and today you're already making an impact. You're spotlighting how you're helping with marketing. You're building a champion program. You're showing the growth. You're showing the wall of love. And these are highlighting certain aspects of the community that are delivering value to the business, although it's not sure how much value. What if you can change those spotlights and uncover the entire map of where you're unlocking business value for your organization? What if it was readily apparent to everybody that community was delivering outcomes for every single aspect of the business? And so if we take a step back and we start where we were, this time you're not sitting backstage anymore. You're actually sitting in the front stage, right in the first row. You're beaming. It's because you were just announced as the first chief community officer for the company and the first at any Fortune 500. You're ecstatic. And then at this company kickoff, your CEO starts to talk about what the community has delivered and how important it is to the business and to the objectives that you have and the commitments you've made to the street. Why is this so much more valuable? Because this means that the CEO understands intrinsically the value of community and what it unlocks. You don't have to do the explaining anymore. After the event, everybody's coming up to you and saying, oh, how can we work more closely with you? That is where we want to get to. We don't need to be in the spotlight, but what we need to do is make sure that everything that we're doing is being realized by the people around us. Thank you for the time. I've had a blast talking about ROI. I would love to help your communities as well. If you'd like to learn more, the first thing I'd ask is join our community. So we have the Uncommon community. It's about 1,000 community leaders, DevRel leaders, talking about the tough stuff in community, like how do we do this? What are some ways that we could do this? And also you can learn about the product there as well. Interact with me. I'm on Twitter, Sudoteki. You can see other presentations, question and answers, as well as community officers on our events page. And then finally, learn more about us at commonroom.io. Spin up your own free trial, read our docs, look at our API. We're here to help, and we're here to help build vibrant, healthy communities that deliver business impact. Thank you.